Hey everyone, welcome to a continuation of my creepy car story series. This is week 3 with video 3. Now I'm going to level with you guys. I wasn't planning on doing the Reddit portion of this series quite yet, but the last link I was trying to use didn't have any good stories. So I was like, well, I'll just go to Reddit and hope there's enough stories for the next 2 weeks. Anyway though, enough delay. I do hope you enjoy. I will see you all in the first story. This first story on Reddit is from user Orca74. Driving back from a late-night high school football game that I was covering, I was going through a very remote section of highway in farmland. I was a little zoned out, but the road was straight and wide for a while. I was going along at a good clip when I was vaguely aware that there was suddenly something in my way. But it was almost just a sense of it, not anything I could really see. Something just didn't look right. And I could tell hitting the brakes was not going to help, so I swerved into the opposing lane and passed something large that had been blocking my lane. I still didn't know what it was, but it was large. I got turned around and went back slowly to see what the hell I had barely missed. When I got close enough to see better in my headlights, there they were, 2 very large, completely black cows. They were big enough that my hatchback would have been totally crushed if I had hit them, and it could have easily been a fatal accident. For me and the cows. I called the local police, and they sent a car out while I waited to make sure no one else hit them, even though the cows wandered off the road a ways, and I hadn't seen another car for quite a while. When they got there, they knew who the cows belonged to and called the guy up all pissed off because apparently this had happened before and more frequently than they liked. This second story on Reddit is from Reddit user Co74. About 20 years ago, I was driving home from a late wedding DJ gig. I was driving south on a major interstate which was relatively empty at 2:30 a.m. or so. At one point, it narrows. The retaining walls on each side get very high as the highway snakes underneath an overpass. Out of nowhere, a young woman jumped down from the retaining wall onto the highway and directly in front of my car. I hit the brakes hard, come to a complete stop, and nearly slammed into her. She looked up, ran to my passenger door, and got in looking terrified. She looked between 16 or 20 years old, long blonde hair, and her clothes looked a little dirty. Not homeless dirty, but like she'd fallen down a few times. I just need to call my mom, she said. I tried to calm her down and began moving back down the highway and behind me about 50 feet. I see another figure jump down onto the highway out of my rear view window. I didn't mention this to her and she didn't look back or see the other person. I sped up and went about 4 or 5 exits south. She kept saying over and over, I just need to call my mom. This was before most people had cell phones, so I told her I would take her to one of those 24-hour grocery stores and she could call her mom. I asked her if she needed money for a payphone, what was wrong, etc. She said nothing other than I just need to call my mom. I pulled up to the grocery store and stopped. She got out quickly, but not running, then ducked into the grocery store. She didn't say a word to me or look back. I pulled into the gas station across the street and called 911 and told them the entire story and let them know the young woman was inside the grocery store and a description of her. I have no idea what happened. I don't know why she did that, what happened to her, who the figure behind us on the highway was. Nothing. Really made me super uneasy. I think I did the right thing. I would have tried to do more, but she seemed really fragile emotionally and somewhat afraid of me. I am a guy, so I wanted her to just be able to get to where she needed to be. The third story comes from Reddit user Poltergeist. A couple of friends and I were coming home from a late afternoon night hike a few weeks ago, and we decided to pull over near a rundown rest stop so my friend could use the bathroom and the rest of us could stretch our legs. It was maybe 8 p.m., and it's winter here, so it was pitch black. This area is just thick trees and bushland, so there's no houses or campgrounds or whatever around. I believe there used to be, but they moved the campground somewhere else because it's on the side of a mountain and it was too dangerous. As we were all getting back into the car, I felt sort of uneasy. I didn't want to mention it because I didn't want my friends to make a big joke about it, but someone else spoke up and said they felt uncomfortable too, and that we should get out of there. We all agreed, and as soon as my friend started the car, these lights flickered on in the middle of the trees. We kind of stared at them for a moment. I want to say there was 6 or 7 of them. 2 of them were higher than the others, and then the rest of them were in a line below them. They kind of bobbed, like someone was holding a torch of something, but they were way brighter than an ordinary torch. We started reversing out of the car park, the car still facing these lights, when suddenly they just sped at us through the trees. I don't know how to explain it. It looked like they were zooming towards us super fast. We were terrified, and my friend just flung us out and got the hell out of there. I'd have just told myself it was people in the woods. Except when we were driving down the road at 60 kilometers per hour, we could still see them trailing behind us in the trees, keeping pace. After a couple of seconds, they just disappeared, and the rest of the way home was as uneventful as ever. We have absolutely no idea what that could have been. As far as I know, you can't get vehicles into the area since it's overgrown and dangerous, and I don't know that any person could keep up with a car like that. I'm not a big believer in aliens and UFOs and stuff like that, but to be honest, if you told me that's what we saw, I wouldn't be surprised. This story comes from Reddit user Eclantefi. I had something creepy happen to me a few months ago. I was driving home after seeing a play with a friend of mine, so it was probably around 11:30 p.m. or 12 a.m. Also, I live in rural America, so there weren't any street lamps or houses for the majority of the drive. I was driving over this bridge and saw a car sitting on the side of the road turned on. I wasn't really concerned about it because it's a common place for cars to pull off, even if it was kind of late. As I passed the car, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw that they had pulled out behind me. Again, I didn't really think anything of it. Until they began to tailgate me hard. While that behavior isn't unheard of, it tends to be rare since the road is curvy and a hot spot for deer. I kept driving for a bit with this car right up on me, which caused me to feel frustrated, confused, and strangely paranoid. Then, the car's headlights went out abruptly while I was nearing the end of a stretch of road surrounded completely by forest. This made me freak the mess out because it was still super close to me. Then, the car sped up and went around me, but almost immediately slowed down to a standstill in front of me. At this point, I was so afraid, so I sped up, went around the car, and drove way too fast to get home, and then sprinted inside and locked the door. I didn't notice the car around my house, but I still feel worrisome about the entire ordeal, and wish I knew why someone would drive like that. This story comes from Reddit user Just Lurking Through. My friend broke down about an hour away from where I lived, so I went out to go get him. When I got there, it was pitch black and he was being helped by some strange guy with no car. Inbreed foothill type guy. He was just messing around with my friend's engine or whatnot. Then another guy walks up out of nowhere and asks what's wrong, so I explain that my buddy broke down and we're helping him. The guy says, "Well, it's a good thing you're here. This area isn't safe after dark." Then he walks away. I notice how odd this all is. I mean, we're in the middle of nowhere and a guy just popped up to tell me I'm in danger. The mountain guy gets my buddy's car to run and comes up to talk to us. He said it was like 3 different things wrong with the car and that we should leave it here and drive it to the local mechanic in the morning. Then says, "Don't stay here though. This town gets dangerous after dark. Real weirdos come out." Then he walks away. My buddy and I jump in my car and are freaking out the whole way home. Who the mess were those guys, and why did they both think that? Also, the mountain man was not in on the other conversation, yet he said that line as sincerely as the dude who popped in for like 5 minutes. It's very strange, very frightening. This story comes from Reddit user Happiness Tiger. A strange thing happened to my wife and I back in around 2005 or 2006 while driving at night in the UK. We were driving from my wife's parents' house in Somerset quite late on a Sunday night back to our house in London. It was a clear, dry evening. There was nothing remarkable about the weather or anything else for that matter. Towards 10 p.m., we were approaching a town called Corsham in Wiltshire. I was driving and my wife was navigating using a road atlas. As I remember, the surroundings became more built up with streetlights and trees in a spot where a couple of other roads joined ours. My wife said that we needed to keep going straight and pointed directly ahead. There was no traffic waiting to join our road, so I carried straight on. I double-checked both roads again when suddenly a thick patch of mist shot across the road from right to left in front of us. It must have been about 10 to 15 meters across and about 5 meters high, and my guess, it was traveling at about 50 miles per hour. The speed it appeared at was quite alarming, and I instinctively hit the brakes and saw our headlights, the pop-up type, temporarily disappear into the mist, which then engulfed the car as it passed over us. As this happened, I became disoriented. I was fully conscious and knew that something odd was happening. I went dizzy and experienced a sensation of my car seat being spun backwards 360 degrees with me in it. I could see the road ahead, but due to the dizziness, it suddenly appeared to go vertical and then fall to the side before becoming normal again. In the meantime, I knew I was driving and that there was no other traffic, so I made a conscious effort to hold the steering wheel straight with both hands and brake to come to a halt. The mist carried on its way, and after a few seconds, everything cleared. A bit shocked, I asked, "What the mess was that about?" To which my wife answered, "I have no idea, but I feel like I've just been spun backwards in my seat, and I went really dizzy." We pulled over to the side of the road and gathered our thoughts before continuing with our journey. We were both quite shaken. We've no idea what might have been in this mist to cause us both to get disoriented in the same way. It arrived, traveling at speed, and was then gone. It wasn't a windy evening. This mist seemed to be traveling, rather than just blowing around, if that makes sense. There was no smell to it, so I don't think it was a chemical cloud, or something that disoriented us both, but I guess it could have been. The car was always maintained properly, and wasn't leaking any fumes into the passenger compartment. Besides, the car was a convertible and, while we had the roof up at the time, it wasn't nearly as airtight as a normal car, so any fumes wouldn't necessarily hang around. I'm not a meteorologist, but there was no reason why there should have been any mist around that night. I was driving, so definitely hadn't been drinking, nor had my wife. The car was quite a firm ride, so there was no wobbling effect from the soft suspension. All things I've considered, but haven't come up with a viable explanation. It was only when looking around online recently that I found that Corsham seems to be quite well known for underground mines and buildings. I think there was something more to this mist than normal. I'd love to know what.